Welcome back to Yoga Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Waycott. If you're new here, I've been a yoga teacher for the past 14 years in a wide range of settings. And today I run a fully independent yoga business that doesn't rely on studio classes. I offer pre-registered yoga series for my community, continuing education for my peers, and I train aspiring yoga teachers at the 200-hour level. Over the years, I have learned a lot about teaching yoga with clarity and depth and creating a career that's actually sustainable. A big part of my mission is to have honest and grounded conversations with real yoga teachers around the world about what it's actually like to work in the modern yoga industry, and that is exactly what Yoga Insider is here for. Grab yourself a cup of coffee and join me for today's episode. All right, so we are back for another week of Yoga Insider Podcast. It is always good to be here. I really like recording the podcast. And I feel like it's so funny because there's some weeks where maybe I don't feel as motivated, but then as soon as I sit down to record, I'm excited and happy to do it. And there have been some weeks where I'm like, am I gonna get a podcast recorded this week? Am I gonna get it done? And so far, I haven't missed a week, which feels like a milestone. And it feels like creating this podcast is becoming part of my practice and part of what I'm meant to share with the world. But yeah, it was a productive week in my world as a yoga teacher. It was our second week for my yoga community in the new practice space that we've just moved into recently. I'm hosting my pre-registered monthly yoga series at our local museum. And so it's always a transition, right? And it takes a while for people to get used to being in a new space, but it feels like that's going really well, and all of the feedback is positive so far, at least what people are sharing to my face. But everybody's saying how much they appreciate having such a big room and having so much space to spread out and not feeling like they're cramped in and on top of each other. So that is really, really nice. And then I feel I feel so pleased because I finally finished organizing all of my tax paperwork to send off to our accountant. And I mean, if you're listening to this, you are probably a yoga teacher and you're probably self-employed. And you know that for us, sometimes there's just a little bit of extra work. It's not just as simple as submitting a T4. I don't have anything like that. I've got to keep track of my own books. And so, yeah, it feels good to have that all finished and ready to send off. And I just booked some flights to somewhere very exciting where I am teaching coming up this spring. And yeah, and I just booked a studio rental as well for a yoga intensive that I'm offering in April. So if you live here in the Fraser Valley, Lower Mainland, Greater Vancouver area, even Washington State, I will have more information on that coming this week. So yeah, I don't know. I just feel like the energy of spring is here and things are finally moving and I'm getting things done. And it feels good. And not every week is like that, right? So we have to celebrate the small wins. But this week on Yoga Insider, I feel compelled to send a little bit of love and encouragement to the new yoga teachers out there. So if you identify as a newer yoga teacher, if you are just starting your teaching journey, or maybe you've only been teaching for a handful of years, this episode is for you. And I feel like when you're a new teacher, so much of those first few years of teaching is really just about finding your footing. And every experienced teacher that you look up to has been in your shoes at some point. We have all been where you are. And I've spent a lot of time with new yoga teachers, especially over the past few years, being a teacher trainer and running trainings. And so I feel like I have become extra sensitive to like what it's like to be a new yoga teacher. It's kind of like walking through it all over again every time you train teachers. And yeah, it's a journey. So I always say, and you've heard me say this on the podcast before, that it takes so much courage to learn to teach yoga and to be willing to teach yoga. And I feel like the early days of teaching can be like a bit of a roller coaster of feelings. And you are probably going to have these really like high highs where it feels like things click and like you have these moments of clarity where things make sense. And we all usually have this feeling as new teachers where like you can't believe that you're getting paid to teach yoga. You're like, you're telling me I get paid to do like my favorite thing ever and help people and help them feel better. Like, so there's these moments as a new teacher that are almost like euphoric. And then at the same time, we tend to have some kind of low lows as well, where you might have some really hard teaching days where you feel like you're fumbling or things that are unexpected come up, or you encounter situations that are just so bizarre and your like YTT program could have never prepared you for some of the things that you will encounter. And you start to question if you are really like cut out to do this kind of work. And I am here to remind you that those ups and downs are a completely normal part of the process of learning to teach. And every experienced yoga teacher that you look up to has been through that phase of figuring things out. And so today in the podcast, I want to share 3 pieces of advice that I think can be really helpful for newer yoga teachers. So these are like 3 perspectives that can hopefully make your teaching just feel a little bit more grounded, a little bit less overwhelming. And my first piece of advice for you is to not compare yourself to teachers who have been doing this a lot longer than you. So my advice is to look to them for inspiration as to what's possible, but manage your expectations. So I absolutely love getting myself into rooms with yoga teachers who are way more experienced than me. And I'm willing to like travel and do things that are inconvenient to get into rooms with those teachers because I think it's so important. And when I'm with them, I feel like a sponge and I just want to soak up all of their wisdom. And I love hearing about their teaching journeys and like the crazy stories that they share and hearing how they have evolved over time and adapted and like made mistakes. And I just find their stories so inspiring. And I love hearing and understanding what it took them personally to like get to where they are now. And I feel like with social media, especially, and like particularly if you don't have like a mentor or a teacher in your life who's more experienced that you are able to connect with from time to time, sometimes we end up like looking to the internet. And I find that like we only really see the shiny parts on the internet, and we see these celebrity yoga teachers who are like teaching all over the world and showcasing, you know, their glamorous lifestyle, but we don't get the full picture. Like we don't see what's actually going on behind the scenes or what it took to get there. And like maybe they've been on this teaching journey for 30 years and, you know, you are just seeing a little tiny glimpse of it. And I just want to say that it's so normal to look up to experienced yoga teachers and assume that they have always been as confident and as polished as they appear right now. But often what you're seeing is the result of many years, often decades, of really hard work behind the scenes. And what you typically don't see, especially if you are just like idolizing experienced teachers from afar, are things like the years and years that they spent teaching in like less desirable time slots, or the years that they spent teaching for really bad pay, workshops that they ran that only 2 people signed up for, offerings that they had to cancel due to low registration or circumstances like outside of their control. Things like seasons of uncertainty or seasons where they were really questioning whether teaching yoga was going to be financially sustainable. And a lot of the teachers who have built careers with staying power in the yoga industry have gone through very long periods of experimentation and learning that have led to a gradual refinement of their craft. And I can say with confidence that that refinement was not linear. It is always a path with like loops and spirals and ups and downs. It is never, ever like an upward trajectory. So if you are finding yourself comparing your first 2, 3, 4, 5 years of teaching to someone who has been teaching for 15, 20, 30 years, I think that it creates kind of an unrealistic benchmark or unrealistic comparison. And a teacher who has been teaching that long has taught thousands of classes. They have worked with thousands of students. And the biggest thing is that they have had time. Like, time is key here. They have had time to develop their teaching style, time to refine their language, time to deepen their studies and make mistakes, time to build relationships with community. That's huge as well. And none of this happens quickly. None of this happens in just a few years. Okay. This is like a lifetime of work that sometimes you're seeing, and you just cannot be comparing yourself to that. So what I want to advise is that rather than comparing yourself and your business to that of much more experienced teachers, I think it is healthier to view them as examples of what is possible over time, while keeping in mind that everyone's career path in the yoga industry is completely unique. So their path can show you and like give you an example of what sustained dedication to teaching can look like and what it can lead to. But it doesn't mean that you have to be operating exactly the same way as them or, at the same capacity that they are when you're just in your first few years of teaching. So I think, the kind of questioning that you can ask yourself that would be more productive is, instead of saying like, why am I not as good as them yet? Or how do they make it look so easy? Or how do they fill all of their offerings? Like, instead of just comparing yourself in that way, I think it would make more sense to ask yourself, like, what can I learn from their approach? And what is it about them that really inspires me? Okay, so maybe get a little bit more broad with it, because your path is never going to look exactly the same as another teacher's. Like, we all have completely different circumstances. And I think that it can be hard to hear that, because I think deep down, a lot of us just want to, be told that there's like this magical, 10-step process and just follow these magical steps and then you'll have the perfect yoga career. And there are no clear steps to follow. Like, we are operating in a completely unregulated industry. So what I want to recommend is that you pay attention to what it is about those experienced yoga teachers that inspires you or really sparks your interest. Okay. And one example is like, maybe you notice that a teacher you admire has very clear cueing. And from the outside, you might assume that every single podcast, sorry, Waylon comes back with his squeaky toy. What do you have? What do you have today? Today, it is a squeaky banana. If you are watching on YouTube, I think 2 episodes ago, it was a squeaky Snoopy wizard. So again, we will just put this on the desk as usual. And Waylon will go underneath the desk. Okay, you got to go underneath. I bought him this like sheepskin rug that he's supposed to lay on. Waylon, come here. Come here. It's like one of those sheepskins that the Kundalini teachers sit on. Okay, anyways, so I will get back to the podcast. So yeah, maybe you notice that a teacher that you admire has really clear cueing. And then from the outside, like you might be quick to just assume that some teachers are just like naturally good at cueing, or they're just naturally good at teaching and speaking in front of an audience. But we have to kind of think a little bit behind the scenes and remember that in most cases that level of clarity that you were experiencing in their class came from an enormous amount of repetition and practice, right? And I'm just saying this like to help you put things into perspective. So something like really great cueing is a skill that is going to develop over time from teaching hundreds and thousands of yoga classes. And the good news is that it's a skill that you can develop too. Like you can absolutely achieve that. But like, don't just assume that, you know, it's easy for them and like you should just be able to instantly teach like that as well. Like everything that we do as yoga teachers typically takes a lot of time, okay? Another common one that I see is like newer teachers wondering how a more experienced teacher was, say, invited to teach at a conference or like a really visible event. And again, it might be easy to assume or like just kind of see from the outside that these teachers are just having like big opportunities fall in their laps somehow and they're just like appearing out of nowhere. But the reality is that yoga teachers who present at conferences or like larger industry events, for example, have often spent a really long time like purposely and strategically sharing their work publicly. So these teachers might have done things that kind of compound over a number of years, such as writing articles for yoga magazines, recording educational content, teaching workshops. Maybe they have a podcast. Maybe they share thought leadership on social media or like in an email newsletter that they send out. And then over time, that work and those efforts compound and their perspective eventually becomes recognizable. And people might even start to associate those teachers with like certain ideas or certain areas of expertise. And I think that event organizers are often looking for teachers who have something really clear and really specific to contribute. They want teachers who can articulate their ideas really well and who have demonstrated that they're like committed to their work and, you know, they've been in it for a while. And so when you see an experienced yoga teacher, you know, teaching on a stage or presenting at a conference, it is often the result of them very consistently sharing their work and contributing to wider conversations in the yoga industry. And again, I'm just sharing this to like give you a little bit of perspective. So if you are finding yourself in that comparison headspace and you're a newer teacher and you're comparing your work to teachers who've been doing this for a really long time, it's really important to manage your expectations. I think you will be a lot happier if you do, because what you're seeing is the result of a process that is very long, and it's not realistic to expect that your teaching or your business or your career is going to look the same when you're still in the very early stages of your craft and like learning your craft. And I feel like if you can come to that realization that it's actually quite freeing, because it reminds you that teaching yoga is like a lifelong endeavor. It's a lifelong practice. And that brings me to my second point, which is that to teach well takes time. And patience is one of the most important qualities that you can cultivate as a yoga teacher. So, piece of advice number 2, is to have patience and just know that like learning to teach takes longer than you think. So one of the biggest misconceptions about yoga teacher training is that graduating from a 200-hour program means that you are like fully formed as a yoga teacher. And the reality is that your first yoga teacher training is just the starting point. It's just the jumping off point. And it gives you a framework and like the basic tools that you need to go out into the community and to start teaching. But the real learning and the real like development of your skills doesn't start until you go out into the world and start working with real students. And what I know to be true is that this can be a little bit jarring sometimes, because if you're a new yoga teacher in this position, you're learning on the job. You are usually there on your own by yourself without anybody to hold your hand. You're doing it on a stage in front of an audience, and that takes an immense amount of courage and like a huge willingness to be seen and a willingness to mess up in front of people. Okay. And that is like not easy. That's terrifying for a lot of people. So I think that a lot of new yoga teachers expect themselves to feel confident and to feel like really proficient much sooner than is realistic. And I feel like sometimes teachers like have taught for a year or 2 years and then they start to think, I should have this totally figured out by now. But in the grand scheme of things, you know, having taught for a few years is like very, very early. Okay. So this is like a process that just takes so long. So rather than putting pressure on yourself to have everything figured out really quickly, I would try to focus on making like small refinements, small improvements over time. So maybe this month you are working on giving clearer instructions. Maybe you are simply trying to get more comfortable holding space in the room and like getting comfortable with silence and not having to talk all the time, right? Maybe you are putting yourself out there and you're applying to teach at somewhere that's new to you, or you're hosting an event for the first time. And I think if you stay patient and you keep showing up, the skill will come, but there is no replacement for giving things time, especially when it comes to teaching yoga. And I'm well aware that this advice can feel very unsexy, but if you ask any experienced yoga teacher, we will tell you that things do get easier as time goes on, and you will still face challenges. You will still encounter learning curves that don't ever really go away, but your capacity to like face them and manage them will grow. And over time, you might notice that things that used to feel really challenging or overwhelming or like impossible for you are like easier now. And then they're part of your normal yoga teaching rhythm. But that shift doesn't usually happen quickly. It usually happens really slowly when you keep showing up and when you give yourself time to grow into your role as a teacher. And that takes more than just a couple of years. Number 3 is don't be afraid to experiment in order to figure out what you really like teaching. So the last thing I want newer yoga teachers to hear is that experimentation is a really essential part of building your teaching career. In those early years, you are still discovering what kinds of classes you enjoy teaching, and you're still figuring out how you want to share yoga in the world. And I really think that the best way to figure this out is through trial and error, right? Through trying things and seeing what sticks, right? And what flops, and that's okay too. So I know that the experimentation process can feel a little bit like messy and a little bit discouraging sometimes because just for example, like you might try teaching a workshop and it feels really exciting to you and you've put a lot of effort into planning it. And then only a few people sign up and like you didn't really turn a profit, or you try to launch a series and you're super passionate about it. And then the registration is like a lot lower than you expected. Sometimes you might even have to cancel things entirely because the interest isn't there. And what I want to say is that experienced yoga teachers go through this as well. Like this happens to us as well. So even teachers who've been in the industry for decades are going to occasionally run offerings that don't fill. But I would say that the difference is that we've learned not to take it personally. And we understand that teaching yoga in the modern world requires a degree of experimentation. It requires a willingness to adapt. And so what we can do is try different ideas, observe what resonates with the community and like what lands with people, and then adjust accordingly, right? And try things again. That's really what you have to do. So maybe the timing of the event didn't work for your audience. Maybe it could have been communicated to the public in a way that was a little bit more clear. And like every experience, everything that you try is going to give you more information about your community and about the kinds of offerings that align with your interests and with your strengths. And I really think that there's always something that we can learn from experimentation, and that it is helpful to maintain an attitude of openness and curiosity whenever you're trying something new. Like, have fun with it. Seriously. Try not to get discouraged, like just because you've tried to run a couple of events and they didn't work or you didn't have many signups. Like, don't dwell on that, okay? Like, make it fun, make it playful. Ask yourself what you can learn from it, and you will eventually start to see what resonates with people, what excites you as a yoga teacher. And that clarity that you will kind of arrive at eventually will come from your willingness to try and your openness to learn. So to wrap up today's episode, let's review the 3 things that I hope newer yoga teachers will take away from this conversation. First, try not to compare yourself to teachers who have been doing this work for much longer than you. It is completely natural to look up to experienced teachers and feel inspired by what they're doing. But remember that what you're seeing is usually the result of many years of teaching and refining their craft. You're still in the process of refining that foundation, and that is exactly where you're supposed to be. Second, have patience with yourself as you learn. Teaching yoga well takes a lot longer than most of us expect, and that's okay. Every class that you teach is part of the process of developing your voice, and growth occurs gradually through repetition and time. Third, don't be afraid to experiment. Try different ideas and pay attention to what resonates with your community. Not everything will land on the first try or the second try or even the third. And that is honestly such a normal part of the journey. Every experience teaches you something valuable about your teaching and about the people that you serve. If you are a newer yoga teacher listening to this episode, I want to remind you that the early years can feel messy, they can feel uncertain, but they are also where so much growth and so much evolution takes place. And if you stick with it, you will get to a point where you can look back and smile and laugh and like see how far you've really come. Trust that the work that you're doing is already making an impact, even if you don't quite see it yet. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Yoga Insider Podcast. I appreciate you being here so much. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to leave a review for the podcast wherever you're listening, or leave a comment where you're listening. It really helps the algorithm kind of get Yoga Insider out to more yoga teachers around the world, and it helps us grow. Yeah, thanks for being here. I'll see you next time.